proper visitors, because we will not be speaking about television. Right, so we need that. Okay. Shall I do the clicking? Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's do a really brief background of who we are and why we are here. On the left side. So I'm Nanna, and I'm working on what I call urban interfaces, screens in public spaces, and I am developing a sort of an analytical approach with a comparative perspective on how these very different and various installations, often screen-based interventions in public space, how we can approach them and analyze them and compare them productively. And this in itself also demands that I look elsewhere for theory. So I'm very happy with the invitation to speak here and to engage with the question of how we can productively also activate concepts maybe from television studies in this in connection to these interfaces, and also just as to also introduce our collaboration. We Marijke and I were speaking and thinking about maybe collaborating on research with combining our different interests, and this opportunity was very excellently timed to take a first step. So we are pitching some very early ideas about our projects and that we envision, and we can hopefully get some input and feedback.
Right.
Because
Nanna's background, in short, is in urban screens interfaces. Really, in short, my background is in film festival studies. I also have a double history of teaching on television, but what I'm mainly bringing into this project is my work on film festivals and the work on programming and curating and festivals as sites of cultural legitimization. What this indeed is, this afternoon, we would like to present the first setup of a joint research project that we would like to develop that really brings together our diverging backgrounds in a couple of shared interests that we have. And those shared interests you could define as curating public space and the concept of dispositif. So before we go further, just briefly sketching where we're coming from. The key question, I think, at this point that we're interested in is in what ways are the relations between people, artistic objects, and knowledge shaped by curation of what we call site-specific screen-based artworks in public space. And the book that you see here, rethinking curating art after new media, is an important reference point for us, because it, as the title indicates, it offers a rethinking of what curating modes are after the introduction of new media art, focusing on the reality of the art, and also on its relation to time and space, that we think is really useful for the art objects that we're looking at.
Screen-based media, and sort of in general, yes, like a wider category of screen-based media.
Yeah, so that's an important reference point. Public space is the other one that is really important, because we focus on these time-based and screen-based art forms. Time-based art using screens in a public space, so outside the institutional context, like museums or galleries. And the fact that we focus on public space brings with it a couple of implications, like that they're really defined by their use of space. So there are links to cities, to architecture, to design and planning. They're also defined by their nature as being time-based. So there is a certain ephemeral quality to them, and they need to be understood in their relation to their public constitution. So are these artworks for the public needs? And if so, how? And how should that be linked to the serendipitous nature? Is it kind of disruption of everyday, for example? And here, this element is what we'll use to articulate the social relevance of the project. Then the third one is, well, as a key concept, right now we're thinking about using this which has a genealogy from Valéry, Foucault, and Accam, and is also used quite proactively here in the Utrecht context. So we think it's very useful as a media theory concept to look at the different principles at work in these screens, to see how the screens in the city can provide interfaces to the cities, to other people, to other spaces, and to other temporal realities. Yes, so far our background. Going to the subtitle, from networks to interfaces, we think that this project might also be interesting to participants in this network revision seminar, in particular in the context of a session on post-network TV. Well, the end of a particular way in which broadcast television, structured television viewing has prompted a lot of television scholars to think about what television is and what television culture is. You all know that. Many people, including you did have pointed out that television has actually always been in transformation, and the different configurations of television call for divergent range of understanding. And we think that the research that has appeared on television, actually TV, television in transition, post-TV, etc., some of the titles here, has also really value beyond television studies. And then we think about shifts like the one from broadcasting to narrowcasting, to scarcity to the plenty model, and from mass to niche audiences. Narrowcasting, the plenty model, and niche audiences is something that defines, is necessary to understand media culture nowadays in a much more broader sense, not only post-network television. Vice versa, we think and hope that insights and approaches from outside television studies can enrich television theory or suggest new angles for study.
And of course, our project aimed to offer that to the television study community.
What we do for our project of curating public screens, we shift our focus from networks to interfaces. And we understand this shift not as a really hard transition, but more as a shift in attention. So by drawing on the concept of dispositif, we want to look at the so-called other end of the network as a distribution system, and specifically look at the spectator side. And this is an approach that foregrounds the relationship between spectator, technology, image as situated, and understanding the viewer as locate, perhaps even an encapsulated viewer, who is also the co-curator of a viewing situation. So, a possible example of fruitful cross-fertilization between studies of television and urban screens that we think is worth mentioning in this particular context is drawing on the angle of ambience. So in 2001, Anna McCarthy published the groundbreaking ambient television, visual culture and public space, in which she shifted attention from television viewing in the home setting to the different manifestations of television's presence in public space, such as waiting rooms, sports bars, and retail spaces. In her concluding chapter in this book, she zooms in on examples of video art and their potential to disrupt common televisual viewing conventions. And it is this chapter that where critical questions about the politics of space and spectatorship are most explicitly raised. These questions are picked up by Nikos Papastergiadis, do I pronounce that correctly, and a group of his colleagues who have just completed a 5-year project on large screens and transnational public spaces, resulting in this book, Ambient Screens, in 2016. And this is a very useful source for us. They distinguish between first generation and second generation large screens, and indicate that there's been a really rapid evolution in the configuration of these screens, their uses and their purposes. And the key shifts that they indicate, they overlap partly with what we think is happening and is interesting to study. And that is a shift from treating the screen as a display surface to an interface that is capable of new modes of interaction. And secondly, an extension from the reach of the screen to a local and you could say physically proximate audience to a transnational audience. Our project relates to the research that is done under the umbrella on ambient screens, but is more explicitly concerned with curating and curatorial agency as interaction. There's some overlap in type of case studies that we would look at, but we think it would be also really useful to look at these particular case studies through the lens of television, and that is something that they don't do. So, yes.
So I will introduce a few case studies that we think may be productive, and especially for this particular moment of discussing the relations between these perspectives of interfaces versus maybe more televisual discourse or discourse on television. And I selected some cases that sort of thematize also this idea of television, the seeing something elsewhere. And probably also this idea, the key notion that has been brought up earlier of liveness as maybe characteristic of the televisual paradigm of visual media. So these works, they showcase this idea of television in a post-network and a locative and public context of urban space. We can immediately see that in the images already, and time does not allow to show the footage of the installations, but I highly recommend looking that up online in your own time. So just, I think all these cases, and I would say actually that these are just a sample of a larger collection, they will work with aspects of interfacing, principles of interfacing that have maybe historically been associated with television, but here that we see also as characteristic of other interfaces. So just to mention a few, they work with liveness, not only a temporal synchronicity, but I would propose to also think of it as a spatial liveness, if you can call it that way. The deictic principle of here, there, and now that is combined in a more expanded notion of liveness. And here, this takes the form of the idea of connecting locations, establishing bridges between here and there. And here we have an installation of a bridge, which in its name refers to this idea of bridging locations. Establishing this co-presence in the moment of now. A conventional figure familiar from television history is also the idea of the reporter on location. We've seen an example earlier, and here we can see, well, it's less clear, but the figure on the screen that kind of reports from elsewhere and connects with the viewer in a different location. The idea of direct address, very often associated with television. We see very clearly in a lot of these installations, or a play with that, or something that kind of just is slightly off in the idea of direct address, but it thematizes that, like the installation Underscan, and I will say a bit more about each installation here in a bit. The human scale, which has also been associated with television, the figure of the on-screen image as having more or less seemingly the same scale proportions as the viewer. The medium shots, frame the body as in a physical presence of the spectator. The idea of image transmission from one location to the other, of course, inherent in the idea of television, and hence the idea of presencing something that is elsewhere but making it present somewhere else. And also I would think that mirroring is perhaps a visual model that we can recognize in television as a sort of cultural dispositif. Literally in some cases, including the self-image on screen or the image of the other on screen as a representative of the self, as a more symbolical reference to the mirror image. So let me very succinctly introduce these works and focus on maybe three principles: this idea of presencing, of connecting, and sharing as interfacing principles that incorporate these televisual characteristics, I think, and export them from a network principle to a post-network location-based model that we are looking at here. Oh, we already have it on?
Just now.
Wow.
Just now.
So this project by Raphael Lozano Hammer, I don't know if you know the artist, he has worked with other installations that sort of in a similar way work with visualizing pre-recorded video footage by making it appear in the shadow of the present spectator, participant, urban dweller who passes on a square. So here, an iteration was shown in Trafalgar Square, who walk around, and if they produce a shadow, in that shadow, another figure immerses. As an interface, it uses the physical shape and size and the contours of the spectator and reveal the image of the pre-recorded other as if sort of in real time, so it kind of creates this temporal and spatial double. And this interact, if you want to call it that, it produces a liveness that suggests presence and synchronicity. Yeah, and here you see that it also, in a way, as an installation, it visualizes the usually invisible trackings of urbanites. These days we are tracked in our movements through digital technologies, sensing technologies, but also think of more surveillance technologies like CCTV or other sort of camera recordings of our presence in urban space, and it kind of works with that. The principle of the interface itself, so it tracks the movement of the people present, and it uses that to visualize another. So it kind of comments on the presence of all these visual technologies in our public space.
Yeah, the installation projects these images in the shadow, shadows of passers-by on the square, but every seven minutes the installation is rebooted, that it starts again, and the rebooting of the installation is visualized as the tracking system that you see as a matrix projected on the square. So it becomes it's an insight in how the tracking of the cameras works.
So you could say it's very much about making visible and the act of visibility and the act of revealing, for example, the presence of technologies and data and such, but I think it will be too simple to just interpret it that way. And I think it's an intriguing challenge to sort of look through at this installation through the lens of television. Also, in a slightly different way, it's connected to the idea of seriality. Well, this may be a stretch, but I'm still trying it out, because a lot of these installations were short-lived, installed during a festival or whatever, but they very often also travel, they migrate, they go somewhere else and are installed somewhere else, or artists develop them over the years, or have some aspects of this interfacing principle of visualizing through shadows. But Sonnenheimer has worked with that in another installation as well, so we kind of see this feeding into new works and this kind of organic development. We can even think and imagine that ideas about genre development could be useful in looking at these types of works. Next one, yeah, I have to hurry up. This one, sort of, the other one as well. I think all of the three keywords are relevant to all of them, but this one explicitly addresses this idea of connecting to elsewhere. This is the project The Bridge by Drop Stuff. It was installed in various locations, and people on these locations through webcam technology or the principled webcam to connect also could either see each other on the screen and wave and such, or they would play games, and you would share avatars, or I would be playing with one avatar and the other person with another. We could also wonder if this is essentially very different to see a person waving or to see an avatar moving. It feels different. It feels more present, the other person. But the principle, it uses exactly the same technologies. So we may wonder how this idea of interactivity and representation, how that becomes blurred in a lot of situations. Yes. For the opening, next screen, the installation was performed. They performed a dance with two dancers on different locations, and they would dance together on the screen. So that was kind of the symbolic opening of it.
And also has a link to the event, the vision of live television.
Yeah, it's actually one of the notes that I made during the earlier presentations, that this whole event culture and the performance culture is very clearly present in these cases, and I hadn't realized before that this was so much also obviously so great, so much central to television culture. So that was very useful as well. And performance culture is going to come back in another installation. So this one also, and just to show how this one singular event-like installation has sort of relationship to other installations, that kind of creates a sort of genre bracket. These are very different other iterations of having this connected spaces. The hole in the earth, the bottom image, is a very old one. It's from 2001, it's ancient, but the website still describes it as the idea is to create a virtual tunnel through the earth connecting to public spaces in Rotterdam and Shanghai, and people could communicate with each other, and of course it's a joke to have it on the ground, but it also invokes this sort of architectural metaphor of the tunnel, where the other one is called the bridge, and the top, was it the top one? Yeah, the top one was called a portal for communication, another sort of architectural idea of this connection. The top one is a spin-off of the earlier mentioned 5-year program where the book, The Transnational Screens, the Ambient Screens that Marijke mentioned. It was a project in Melbourne, connecting to Seoul, amongst other places. And here is a kind of a spin-off. It's people performing also a dance on the 2 locations. So it's interesting how dance and performance is a recurring way of activating this idea of simultaneity and shared. So besides war, it's also dance. I don't know, that's a silly connection.
Another one?
Yeah.
Final one.
So another project that also uses this idea, the word portal, literally, so they're all connected also in that sense, is the project Portals, I believe.
Yeah,
it's called, yeah, Portals. They are, as a quote reads, are gold spaces equipped with immersive audiovisual technology. When you enter a portal, you come face to face with someone in a distant portal, live and full body, as if in the same room. And here we see this connection to the idea of the human scale, the connection to being co-present, but also here the sort of living room connotation, because it is a space that is kind of, it has carpet, and it has a screen, you see someone else in a different portal elsewhere. And so this is kind of an ambivalent setup in terms of publicness, because it's set up in public space, explicitly so, and it's accessible, but it is an enclosed space.
Yeah,
so
they have different manifestations of the portal. So
yeah.
They have the containers, and they also have that they also have
spin-offs. Yeah.
Have like a real public.
And they also announced that they have like sort of stage versions, which is kind of stretching the idea of a portal, but it's like that there's on a big performance, on a stage live event, there could be it's basically the idea of a video link, but then with a sort of an encapsulating location or something connected to it. So we thought it was a very evocative example that kind of ties in some of the earlier aspects. Maybe you can show the next image where also, again, this sort of, there's a dancer and musicians in the other space, and they're kind of co-performing. What the ambition is, according to the artists, or the people who, I don't know, they call themselves artists, but initiators, yeah, probably. As suggested on the website, is to create empathic links, and this idea of linking and a sort of empathy ambition of it, I thought was interesting to also maybe think of that in terms of a televisual ambition. Or,
for example, the portal container on the Gaza Strip. So then there are activities curated to organize the events, interaction, live connection with people from different in different locations.
Yeah, and this brings me to a very last point that I want to make about these types of cases, especially referring to our shared interest in curation. You can imagine that these works are curated and also in a way that they are located in a space, and they have their ideas behind them, like what they would trigger and what kind of event could sort of emerge out of them. So maybe in terms of curation, we could also think, when we think of the dispositif, as a sort of a layered curation, because the installations themselves, and maybe television or any other medium, is also a curatorial machine. It produces curation. It's not only curated, but it's also doing curation. So maybe that's a productive way of thinking about interactive technologies, but maybe media technologies in a broader sense. And just to close off, to splash on the screen, we were brainstorming of the productivity of preparing this presentation for this occasion. So these are the questions that we have about these installations, particularly maybe relevant for the question of, is there such a thing, or what is post-television, post-network television? What is it? Yeah, post-network television. Sorry to that bit that we rushed so.
This one?
What?
The final slide?
The final slide is very cute, I think.
Yeah.
It's not the end.
But we
Sorry? Start.
yeah.
But yeah.